Hey guys, this is Joe High with Joe High Photography, and today we've got a very special interview with Mr. Charlie Alsheimer. Thank you for doing this again today.
Joe, it's great to be here.
I am certainly glad to have you here, and we're surrounded by a lot of beautiful photography in this room here. Is this your? Would you say this is your lab?
This is my office. This is
your
where
office.
I made a living. Well, partly made a living.
Well, hey, it looks great. So, Charlie, can you give our viewers here a little bit of background, your history, and what you've done as a nature photographer?
Well, Joe, I basically started full-time as a nature photographer back in 1979. I was involved in the corporate world prior to that. Had a college degree in business administration, worked in corporate sales and marketing. It was a good job, paid very well. However, I was one of these guys who was an outdoorsy type and grew up on a farm. My dad was a deer hunter, and so I became very passionate about deer hunting at an early age. And in 1969, I wound up in a place called Vietnam, and I had a boss from Iowa who did not hunt. We became quite close, and he was a phenomenal photographer. And he used to really needle me, basically saying, how can anybody love the outdoors like you claim to and never carry a camera? Well, I didn't even own a camera. And so I bought camera gear in Vietnam, telephoto lenses, camera bodies, that kind of thing. Came back from Vietnam in 1970, was discharged from the military. Had an honorable discharge. I went back to college, and I started photographing white-tailed deer. Why whitetails? Because I was passionate about whitetails. And so I started photographing them. The more I did it, the more I wanted to do it. Graduated from college, took that job, started to climb the corporate ladder, flying all over the country for the corporation. I actually worked for the Gunlock Corporation in Steuben County. They're located in Wayland. At the time, they were the largest producer of wood office furniture in the world. And eventually, I wound up teaching in their sales school, handling all of sales service for the corporation. So I did a lot of traveling with them. And decided in 1979, chase a dream. Vietnam taught me a lot. It taught me that life is pretty brief. And so if you've got something you're passionate about, you better do it. Because life blinks at you and it's over with. So, 79, I launched into this full time. Initially wanted to photograph bighorn sheep and moose and grizzly bears and all of that, but I had a family that I was really close to, and it's very difficult to have to travel to places like Alaska and the Canadian Rockies and the Rocky Mountain West and be able to be close to your family. So I thought, okay, how am I going to pull all this off and still have a family, if you will? Mm-hmm. And I knew through the market analysis that I had done that white-tailed deer was really where the bulk of photo sales were. For example, I kind of monitored all these magazines in the outdoor, the Field and Stream, the Outdoor Life, Sports Afield, Deer and Deer Hunting. And it says, okay, what are they buying? I mean, that was part of my sales background. And realized that for every 10 photos that were being sold, 6 of them were white-tailed deer. And so I thought, well, I'm going to zero in on whitetails. They're literally in my backyard. My wife and I, who was a school teacher, she's a public school teacher, we bought a farm in 1973, which is, you're sitting on that farm right now. So we bought that farm in 73, and I literally started to photograph whitetails and got a few breaks because I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of public speaking in churches at sportsmen's banquets, met some very incredible people, started photographing on their properties. One was in Pennsylvania. One was in the heart of the Adirondacks, and photographed deer there, started to market my images, and started to do a lot of writing. Hooked up with a publisher that I worked with closely. They thought, okay, can you do books? And I said, yeah, I can do books. I'd actually self-published a book with another individual. We kind of co-authored it together. So I had kind of the knowledge of that. And started to do books with the Krause Publications, which are in Iola, Wisconsin, and wound up doing 7 books. Some of them were coffee table books, and selling to magazines, selling photos to magazines, boy, all over the world. And anybody who wanted white-tailed deer, hey, they contacted you.
And that worked out for you because, as you said, it with your white-tailed deer, that's your passion, and that's where the money was. So it just
that's where the money was. Plus, I was also one of these guys, call it your business background or whatever. I always thought, how can I take this to the next step? Mm-hmm. And so in 1995, we actually built a whitetail deer research facility right here on this farm. We high fenced 35 acres of it. Wound up purchasing 5 whitetail deer and started to study deer behavior unlike it's ever been studied before. How far can they smell? How well can they smell? How fast do they run? How far can they jump? How high can they jump? What do they need nutritionally to survive? So a lot of that stuff was technical, but it also allowed me to kind of branch out, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started writing for a lot of different magazines on deer behavior, and nobody else was doing it. Certainly no photographers were doing it. And in fact, today as we sit here, there's only been 2 individuals that have ever done this, George Barnett in Texas and myself. And so we don't have that facility anymore. We ended it. We did it for 20 years. And so as a result of that, we're able to learn a lot of things about white-tailed deer that were pretty unique.
So that really got you into the hunting community too, not just the photography community.
Well, the hunting community was always there because when I first left the corporate world, I was writing for some of the hunting magazines.
Okay.
And so the writing was there. I was doing deer photography. I was building a portfolio, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I call it a file. And so as a result of that, I mean, I came along at the right time, Joe. I mean, you talk about the 1980s and 1990s, the economy of America exploded. I call it the Reagan Revolution, as some talk show hosts would like to say it, but it literally was. Okay? Give an example. 1979, I started this full time. At the time, there were only 5 major hunting magazines in America: Sports Afield, Outdoor Life, Field and Stream, American Hunter, and Peterson's Hunting. That was it. Deer and Deer Hunting came along about that time, and they were the first totally whitetail magazine. In fact, the critics told those owners that it would never work. Well, it worked, and it worked like unbelievable. Well, so that's in 1979. By the time 1989 rolled around, you had over 50 hunting magazines that wanted whitetail images. One publisher, Harris Publications in New York City, for example, they did 26 hunting annuals, and they needed photos. And it was like I'd struck gold, because I was literally zeroed in on whitetail deer, and that's what I was doing. Now, summer months are pretty flat for this business, okay? And so for 20 years, I did family portraits, senior portraits, sports events, weddings. One year I did 50 weddings.
Wow.
And so I did a lot of
Didn't know that.
I did a lot of wedding photography along the way, and that kind of supplemented everything. And so I'll tell you, I was hustling, but I didn't have to travel great distances to do it. That said, I'd always go west every fall to photograph. Because I'm one of these guys that does the elk and the sheep and the moose and the bears and all of that stuff. So I tried to have a balanced portfolio, if you will. But the whitetails was really what it's all about. I've shot over 1 million whitetail images.
Wow.
In this room we're sitting in.
There's a portfolio for you.
In this room we're sitting in, probably got 140 digital whitetail images, 140,000 whitetail digital images, and probably 400,000 slides.
Which are in these files here.
Files.
So yeah, you've made the transition from film to digital too. You've seen both sides.
And I wish I'd have done it sooner.
Made the switch to digital?
Correct.
Yeah.
Just because of the creativity you've got there. Slides, digital photography changed everything. Prior to that, those individuals who were doing this full time, Joe, they really needed to know the film they were shooting. They really needed to know light, and they needed to know the animal. The camera technology today is, these people take these cameras and they just blaze away. And the technology is so good that they don't have to worry about, okay, is this lighting condition going to be conducive to this film that I'm shooting? Because I basically shot Fujifilm and I shot Kodachrome. And so they were totally different. I knew the ISOs meant you couldn't shoot action stuff as well as you can today. So there's a lot of things that came into play, and the film guys really knew photography. Not that the digital guys don't now, but boy, the guys who were really into film photography, they were photographers, and they were really, really good at it. So that's kind of how the whole thing started.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad we got a chance to establish your reputation because it's a great one. So can we get into some questions now?
Fire away.
Okay. My first question would be, and you kind of answered this. In your case, you said as you struck gold. You have a focus with white-tailed deer, and that's what everyone needed for this booming industry that you entered into. But for other people who have an interest in nature photography and would like to make, some living off of it, how exactly does a nature photographer make some money? Is it always magazines? Because I'm thinking of it like, I'm a wedding photographer, bride and the groom, they pay me to take their pictures. A white-tailed deer doesn't really have that much
Okay,
pocket change.
let me tell you how 90% of the nature photographers have been able to have a career.
Okay.
Number one, they had a day job first. Okay? Why? Because you have to have a portfolio to be able to compete. And if you don't have 10,000 whitetail images, don't get in the whitetail game. Why? Because what happens with magazines is you don't send the same image to 10 places. That's called photographer suicide. So if you've got a great image, okay?
You offer it exclusively?
Well, you hope. You're a freelancer. You're at the whim of an editor. And so you send that image to, say, an Outdoor Life. You don't send it anyplace else. You hope and pray they're going to use it. And if you're good enough, yeah, they'll use it. And so you need a big portfolio so you can break your photo file up and send 100 to this one and 100 to that one and do it that way. So when I say have a day job, I can tell you that most guys either had a wife with a great job, or they did it as an amateur for a long time and finally said, okay, I have enough images now that I think I can do this full time. All along the way, they were shooting everything they could shoot. Flowers, butterflies, fall scenics, springtime, the winter scenes. They carried the camera wherever they went. They were taking their vacations to go to places like the Everglades in the winter to photograph bird life. Or they were taking their vacation in the fall to go to the Canadian Rockies to photograph elk. Or they were taking weekends to go someplace and photograph white-tailed deer. And so that's kind of how most everybody started. I mean, I started photographing here in the States when I got out of the military in December of 1970. And so basically I photographed for almost 10 years before I decided to make the jump. And after 10 years of photographing, I had a lot of images. So I didn't have to worry about, okay, my best shots at Outdoor Life, I don't know if they're going to use it or not. I mean, I've had situations where a magazine has held an image for 4 years before they ever used it.
So you send it out to these magazines, and then do you tell them that it's like you guys are the only ones that I've sent this image to?
They know that.
So and then it's up to them whether or not they use it.
That's right.
And you don't find out until
that's right.
They use it. Oh, that's rough.
That's rough. This is. I can tell you that what I do, there are not 10 full-time photographers in North America.
Well, that's encouraging.
But that's the way it is, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're basically, I'm not on anybody's payroll, okay? I'm self-employed. You're what you call a freelancer. So one of the things that was successful for me is I could not only photograph, I could write too. And so I was able to pitch an idea to a magazine and say, okay, how about a pictorial on the white-tailed deer's ability to jump over things? Okay, I call that action. And so you'd write about your experiences of the whitetail, how far they could jump, how high they could jump. You'd send the guy 20 images, he'd ooh and he'd ah, and he'd say, wow. Okay? Another example. Last year I did for Outdoor Life's website, they contacted me on the phone and they said, do you have anything where you can chronicle a day in the life of a rutting white-tailed buck? And I says, well, what do you need there? Well, we need him rubbing. We need him scraping. we need him fighting, and we need him breeding. I was the only one in the country that had it. And so that was very, very lucrative. Okay?
Yeah.
Sold the package, wrote the story for it, sent them 20 photos. They wound up, I think, using about 9. And so you have to build up a relationship with the editors. You kind of, you're at their mercy, if you will.
Sounds like it.
But it's networking.
Yeah.
Okay? It's networking. And when I was doing all the wedding photography, it was word of mouth. I never advertised. You did one, somebody liked it, they gave your name to somebody, the phone rang, and I just I got out of that business in the mid '90s because of this. I was doing so much of the whitetail stuff that I just didn't have time anymore.
Well, that definitely presents the challenge then.
It is a challenge.
Yeah. But if it's your passion.
Well, the thing of it is, the beauty of what I've been able to do is it's made a great living, okay, but it's made a better life. Our family is very, very close. God has richly blessed us. Our son is a very successful attorney, but he loves the outdoors. He loves to hunt. And man, he's gone with me all over North America. He takes his vacation. We go to the West every fall to photograph, and it's kind of a tight bond that we have.
Yeah.
And it's allowed us to be able to be close as a family.
That's great. So let me ask this then. When you go on a photo trip, you go on a trip for the purpose of taking photos.
Yes.
Okay, like I know you did some recently with the fall colors changing,
Correct.
right? You probably didn't have to go too far for that though. But,
well, when you do a trip, you're doing it well in advance.
Okay.
What you want to do is, I have hired guides to do this, where I wanted to go to do things. But normally what I've tried to do is hit a place multiple times so I know where to go. I don't have to have anybody tell me where to go anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I normally do a trip 1 to 2 weeks on the road. If I'm going to go to the Rockies, for example. My son and I went to the Grand Tetons and Yellowstone this fall to photograph. I wanted to get the autumn colors. I wanted to do some scenic photography. I've been there before to do just wildlife. The two are different because, the scenery stuff, you've got to be there when the light's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that particular trip, I knew the places I wanted to photograph because I'd been there before. I've been to that region 7 times. And so I kind of knew where I needed to be, what time of day I needed to be.
Right. You're familiar with it, so you can bring it on.
Right. And so what I try to do is plan in advance. How am I going to get there? What am I going to do once I get there? What specifically do I want to photograph?
So you have an idea in mind of like, okay, these are the types of images that I want to leave with.
That's right.
Okay. So I think that is something that most people, when they're saying, okay, I'm going to go and take some nature photos, most of the time they just kind of go in and say, this is a pretty place. Hopefully I'll get something cool.
Yeah.
Having a plan, I think that would...
Yeah,
how many images do you usually come back with?
Well, this particular one, when we went we took a week. We went out there the 19th of September, flew back on the 26th of September because I wanted to photograph the East. I wanted to get both sides of the coin this fall. Western, Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did it for a week. And I shot about 5,000 photos while I was out there.
And those are like raw photos?
Raw. I shoot all raw.
Well, I mean, like those are the entire amount? Like,
the entire amount.
Okay.
5,000 shots. That's what I took during the week that I was out there.
How many do you keep out of those?
Well, digital's a different world. The technology's different. In the film days, if you're shooting wildlife, out of a 36 exposure roll, you might get 10 good ones. Okay? In the digital world today, with the autofocus mechanisms in some of these cameras, every other one's going to be decent. It's just a matter of how many you want to keep in your computer.
I got to ask this. You mentioned that the film photographers, because they were limited by film, those were the guys who really knew their stuff. Do you think that, like yourself, shooting on film, do you think that gave you an advantage once you switched over to digital, as opposed to someone like me who started with digital and plays around with film? You can say yes. I won't be offended.
No, initially it was okay, but understand that with Photoshop and everything that's out there today, these young guys your age, they don't know anything about film. They don't need to know anything about film because of what they can do once they bring that image back into their computer system and manipulate and work it, change the light and all of that. It used to be if you wanted to do a really nice scenic shot and the angle of the sun was right, you use a polarizing filter. Well, you don't need to use a polarizing filter today. You just change it in the computer. It'll do it for you.
Yeah, especially with things with the dynamic range that they have now with full frame DSLRs. I know plenty of people still use like polarizing filters, and they use a lot of methods that you don't necessarily need, but they can get more data still if they use a polarizing filter.
Well, I still do.
Even on your digital.
I'm digital, but I still
cameras.
use a polarizer. But there's a lot of things you just don't need to. That kind of is a carryover from my film days that I know what I can do with some of these filters.
Yeah, but there you go. You knew how to use it, filter, and then you can take that next step beyond the guys who don't know how to use it.
Well, the film guys are going to be gone. Okay, I'm 68 years old, and most of these guys that were really into film, I mean, they're 55 plus years old now, and so as a result of that, the younger guys are in digital. They had no clue about film. They hear about it, and all of that.
Yeah. It's kind of there are people who will still do, they're full-time photographers, and they'll do weddings on film, which blows my mind that anybody could ever and still does that, because when I'm shooting on film, it slows me down so much. But people still do it, but it's not a standard. It's more of a iconic thing.
Sure.
I shoot on film. That's like it's their shtick, I guess.
Well, I don't know why anybody would want to do that today.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I guess, I got to shoot. So I put in 32 gig cards so I can just get as many photos as I can. Yeah, it blows my mind that people were doing weddings on film, but it was done.
Now, you made a comment about 32 gig cards.
Mm-hmm.
Most nature photographers don't shoot that large a card because they don't want something to get really lost or destroyed.
So
For example,
take a smaller card?
I shoot 8 gig cards. I shoot 8 gig cards. I'm going to get basically 300 pictures out of that, and I just swap the card out. Then I know that if something goes wrong with this card, I'm not lost. Yeah, I've had guys where they use a bigger gig card, like you say 32 gig, and all of a sudden something happens and they've lost the images.
So it's not putting all your eggs in one basket.
That's right.
I get you.
You break it up.
There's a good tip.
You break it up. And of course, in the film day, you had 36 pictures.
And that's it.
And you had to pause for a minute to change film. And I could get to the point where I could change a roll of film in the camera in one hand.
Wow.
As bizarre as that sounds. But you get really good at it because you're moving really fast, because you have to. And the other side of the coin is today's digital cameras. I shoot all full frame stuff. And, the ISOs, if I'm doing anything where there's going to be any action, I'm shooting at 12. My ISO starts at 1250. In the old days, the fastest film I ever shot was 200 speed film, and so that's why you can get a lot of these incredible images. Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing a wedding at the Stone Chapel on Keuka Lake, Garrett Chapel.
I've done one there. I guess I've done a few there over the years.
It's beautiful. It is so dark.
It's beyond dark.
Yeah, I was shooting at 12,500 the whole ceremony, and it works because you got a 5D Mark III. So, okay, here's something that I wanted to ask, and some of these are like I just want to know because I would like to get better at nature photography. I'm not sure that I could do it full time, but I think it'd be something I'd like to just have more of a skill of. So here's a question. It's really a question for me.
Far away.
Aspiring nature photographers would ask what to do while they're shooting. What tips do you have while I'm there? What do I do with my camera? But a lot of learning anything in photography is from looking at what you've done before. Learning from things that you've done, gaining experience. So what tips would you give an aspiring nature photographer to apply while they're looking at work that they've already shot?
Well, I think first of all, when you're photographing a wild animal, you want to be at his eye level.
Eye level. Okay.
Number two, you always focus on the eyes, just like you do with people.
Okay.
Okay. Number three, you want to be there the first 2 hours of the daylight and the last 2 hours at the end of the day, because that gives you what we call magic light.
The golden hours.
Okay. Another thing is if you can photograph side light or even backlit, then you have a great opportunity to get a real stunning photo.
That's a good one. I like that.
The other thing is flat days like right now with no sunlight allow you to shoot all day long.
Cloudy days.
Cloudy days. Those are the days that I love both, early morning, late afternoon. But if you're trying to get a lot of images, an overcast day will give you a greater opportunity.
Okay.
As bizarre as it sounds. Okay? So if you're photographing out of a blind, and I do often, then you need to set that blind up to take advantage of whatever light condition may take place.
So looking towards one horizon, so you know where if the sun's going to come up over here, then you're getting
That's
side
correct.
lighting, that kind of thing.
That's right.
Okay.
And,
So what?
And the
Oh,
other
I'm
thing
sorry.
is you need to photograph where there is no hunting allowed,
Oh,
because those locations, those animals are habituated to people. Example, Cades Cove, Smoky Mountain National Park. Great place. It's on the western side of Smoky Mountain National Park. It's near Townsend, Tennessee. A lot of the guys photograph turkeys, black bears, and whitetails there, where you can literally walk up to them. They're not afraid of people. They see people all day long. And so you could have a deer bed in the woods and you could get out of your vehicle. You could walk to within about 20 yards of it, maybe closer, and you're not threatening it. You take your pictures and you get back in the car and look for something else. And
that's good.
that's why you find most of the guys that photograph wild animals photograph in a national park.
Where there's no hunting and
No
we're
hunting.
accustomed to
Bird
yeah.
photographers, they're going to do it near sanctuaries that allow no waterfowl hunting, and there's a lot of them in the east. They're going to go to the Everglades in the wintertime, or a lot of the different nature sanctuaries in Florida to photograph bird life. I mean, you can, for example, for me to try to photograph a great blue heron here in New York is almost impossible. That great blue heron is going to fly before I can get within 100 yards of it. In the Everglades, I'm not exaggerating this, I can almost get from me to you from them, and they're not going to fly.
That's
So
gotta
you
be
have
cool.
to learn over the years, okay, I need to be productive. I've got to come back with some images. Where do I go to do this? Now,
So that's something that you can apply not when you're shooting, like not when you're in the moment shooting, but this goes back to your planning your trip.
okay, we're right here in Steuben County, Western New York.
Mhm.
A lot of guys go to Letchworth State Park to photograph whitetails in November. Cruise that road with your vehicle. Those animals in certain sections of the park are not hunted. They're habituated to people, and so you can get pretty close to them. And so as a result of that, you go where there's no hunting allowed. Because if you're trying to become a whitetail deer photographer and you're trying to do it where hunting is allowed, you can forget it.
Because you have to deal with deer like 500 yards away from you.
Not only that, you're dealing with animals that are nocturnal, because they know people are not active during darkness, and that's when they move. National parks,
I didn't even think of that.
National parks is a whole different ballgame. They're active all day long. And so when I want to photograph elk, I used to go to Yellowstone to do it. I go to Jasper National Park in Alberta, Canada to do it. Why? No hunting's allowed. The animals are habituated to people. You know, it's like you aren't there. They're doing everything that they would do in areas where they're hunted, but they're active all day long, and man's not a threat to them.
Okay.
So it's the national parks or refuges where there's no hunting allowed that you do the photography.
So protected areas.
Correct.
That's your best zone. I like that. That's a good tip here. I wanted to ask you, as we're wrapping up here, I wanted to ask you, just because you've done this for so long, I know you've got stories. So I was going to ask, probably whitetail. are not the most dangerous animal that you've ever photographed, but do you have any stories of where it could have gone very bad?
When you do this, as long as I've done it, even though you take all the precautions, you're going to have some situations in your life that were pretty harrowing. And I've had a couple of encounters with bull elk that were kind of crazy. And so, you number one need to be in shape. I'm one of these guys. I work out 5 days a week. Okay, and
That's a good tip right there.
You don't climb mountains, and you don't try to outrun an elk that's chasing you if you're out of shape. And so I just know that I've got to be in shape to do what I do. And so that's all part of it. And most of these really good nature photographers are in shape. And I had a situation take place one time where I had access to an incredible property. The caretaker called me on the phone. He said, "We have a nest of rough-shouldered hawks that's about 35 feet up in a beech tree. Are you interested in photographing?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you can only do it during the week because the owner is here on weekends." So I went down, took a look at it. There was a hemlock tree right next to this beech tree. And I figured, well, I'm going to use a deer stand, and I'll hang this lock-on tree stand at the same level as the nest is. And it probably put me within about, I'm going to say, 25 feet of the nest, even with it, 35 feet off the ground.
Okay.
I get in there before daylight. I wait till the adults have left the nest. I climb up, get in the stand, lock myself in. I start photographing, and I had this sensation of something behind me. And I turn my head like that, and I've got one of these adult hawks, wings outstretched, gliding right straight at me. And I duck like I'm holding on to the tree here. I had the camera on a tripod. I duck like that, and that adult hawk went right between my head and my hand. I could feel the wingtips hitting me in the head going by. And it landed on a nest, and it just went screeched like mad. Just made it. Yes, it was kind of crazy.
Wow.
That's a bird situation.
How big are they?
Their wingspan probably is a good 3 feet.
Yeah.
So I've had situations with elk take place where you're photographing during the rut. You normally have a number of photographers around all of this that's going on. The elk gets frustrated and chases somebody. You've got to really move fast.
Those are large animals too.
Well, they're 600 pounds, and so I've had that happen. I had another situation taking place one time in Denali National Park in Alaska, photographing a huge bull moose. We saw it from the road. He was about half a mile away. We saw it with a spotting scope, went after it, and we're about where we thought it was. Now, I've got a big telephoto lens. I've got a big tripod. I'm carrying it. The guy I was with says, "I'm going to go around that patch of brush to see if he's on the other side," because we thought he was better. So I'm just standing there. This guy walks around the back side of this brush. He's probably 40 yards from me, and he hollers, "You see anything over there?" And this humongous bull jumps up and runs right at me. Well, I didn't even touch the camera. I turned around to run, and I was in willows that were about 3.5 feet high, and I started running and fell down. The only thing I could think of was, what a way to die. But when I hit the ground, that bull just peeled off and ran by me.
Didn't see you?
Well, he saw me, but when I went down, for some reason, he figured, well, I've
scared him to death.
I've taught this guy his lesson.
Oh man!
And so you have certain situations like that. And I don't have a ton, but I probably have 15 or so like that. But that spans almost a 40-year career.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be very cautious. You have to know the animal's behavior, and you don't ever get between a bear's cubs and her.
I've heard that before.
But just around bears, you got to be very careful.
You've done much work with bears?
I don't do a lot, but I've done a little bit with grizzlies and black bear. But they're pretty temperamental.
Wow.
Pretty temperamental. Whitetails, on the other hand, during the rut, a buck can be really, really aggressive. I mean, big time aggressive. And I've only ever had one bad encounter with that, and that was in the Adirondacks. It was in a wintering area, and you've got these deer coming. At that time, people could feed deer, and so I was actually photographing these deer in January, and the snow was deep up there. It was very cold, and these deer had actually runways coming into this place where the feed was. And I can remember the owner of the land saying, "We've got one spike buck here that's really aggressive. He may or may not come in this afternoon." Well, I'm on one of these trails, kind of about 100 yards from where they feed, just kind of looking around. I got my camera in one hand, and I can see this buck coming down the trail, the spike buck.
Mm-hmm.
And he's all bristled up with his ears back. And I'm thinking to myself, he's going to come after me. And so he's strutting down the trail in a very aggressive manner, not running, kind of like what we call a threat walk. And I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? Well, he got about from me to you, and he lunged at me, and I grabbed one of the spikes, which they're about 1 foot long. And I knew if I got him off the trail, I'm going to be in waist-deep snow. And he tried to lunge at me with his antlers. I grabbed one antler, dropped my camera in the snow, and grabbed the other antler. I pulled him off the trail and just jumped on him. We went into that snow that was 3 feet deep.
You're making this up.
No, I'm not. And I exhausted the guy.
Oh my gosh.
Now the state came in a day later. The state came in and actually killed the guy, killed the deer the day later because of what was going on.
He wasn't like rabid, was he?
No, not at all.
Was it during the rut?
Nope. This animal just it was just aggressive towards everything.
Holy cow.
Other deer. So that was kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah.
But without the deep snow, you never would have been able to beat him. But you could have just exhausted. Keep in mind, this is January. It's the Adirondacks. This animal's stressed to begin with. And so you never know what's going to happen. But you better be ready for the worst.
Be ready to wrestle a spike buck.
A spike buck.
There you go.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I did not know that you were going to tell me that story. That was pretty cool.
That was a long time ago. That's something you never forget.
I wouldn't. Holy cow.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
Yeah, that is a really cool story. That's something. Yeah. Wow.
Now
that's something that your kids too.
You really didn't get into this, but from an equipment standpoint,
boxing gloves. For the deer.
I would tell anybody that's an aspiring nature photographer, buy the best equipment you possibly can buy. They're expensive, but anybody you're trying to compete with is going to have the best equipment. So it's a full frame digital camera,
mm-hmm.
and you need a lot of millimeter in your lenses. And so basically the bulk of my photography is done with 4 lenses. And the 4 lenses that I use a 24 to 120 Nikkor lens. It's an f4.
Okay.
I do that a lot for scenics.
Mm-hmm.
I use a 70 to 200 zoom lens. I use a 2 to 400 zoom lens, and I don't shoot anything over an f4. So they're either f2.8s or f4. And the 4th lens that I use is a 15 or 16 to 35 zoom lens, and I use that for a lot of the scenic wide angle
very
stuff.
wide angle.
So 4. Now I've got other lenses. I've got a 500 millimeter f4. They're all autofocus. They're all top of the line Nikkor lenses. I shoot Nikons. You're either a Canon guy or a Nikon guy in this business.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 brands that most all the pros shoot. And you want a camera that's going to advance that film at least 8 frames a second or faster. Birds in flight, deer running, you need to capture that whole sequence as fast as you possibly can.
So fast frame rate, full frame, and long lenses. Have options for your.
And one more thing.
Length.
Buy a brand of camera that allows you to shoot good quality images at higher than an ISO of 1000.
Because that'll get you a higher shutter speed for
That's
running.
right. I can tell you that most all these action photos you see in magazines, the ISO these guys are shooting at is probably 1250 to 4000.
So there's really no point in working in that 400 and below.
No.
For your ISO. Okay.
Now, when I shoot scenic stuff, I'm shooting at ISO 100.
Well, yeah, that's.
Nothing's moving.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got everything on a tripod. I'm not worried about things flying around. I'm not worried about animals running away from me. But you're always thinking ahead of time. You're saying, okay, what's going to happen here? What could possibly take place here that I want to be able to get? When I shoot, I'm always thinking about double page spread, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm thinking,
Cover image.
and what I basically do with Outdoor Life and Field and Stream, their parent company is Bonnier Corporation. They're out of New York City. So every year I put together a binder of photos for them, and I send them 250 photos a year of whitetails only. And I've done that for 5 years in a row now. So their art director's sitting there with 5 Alsheimer binders with all kinds of different whitetail images. So that when he wants something, he can say, well, rather than me make 5 phone calls, or rather than me sending out a blast of emails, maybe they're in one of Alsheimer's binders here.
So do you give them prints?
No, I give them, what I do is I send them a contact sheet in these binders.
Oh, contact sheets, okay.
And I used to put a CD in there, okay?
Well, so what
what I do now is I'll send a binder of about 5 different subjects in there, all white-tailed deer now, whitetails and food plots, action whitetails, whitetails autumn, whitetails in snow, and then I'll send them a page of elk pictures. And so they've got a binder with 5 pages of contact sheets. Page number 1's a specific folder. Page number 2 is a specific folder. Page number 3 is a specific folder. And now they got a flash drive. You put that flash drive in the computer, and the folders all pop up.
The same order.
The same order.
What's to prevent them from just using the image? Do you give them a full res file? I mean, what's to prevent them from just using it?
I send them, this is called ethics in this world, okay? And so what I do is I send them in JPEGs, high resolution JPEG.
Okay.
I take the raw file,
right,
and I put it in JPEG, and all those cover shots are off of the JPEG.
So you've never had that happen where somebody used an image without your permission?
Well, I have, and you catch up with them. You see it somewhere, and you say, okay, how do you want to handle this?
You track them down.
Track them down.
Okay. That's surprised me, actually, that you give them the JPEGs ahead of time.
Well, you got to. You're a freelancer.
Because then they have it.
The
point is to have it right then, so they
You have to understand, magazine editors, everything is a fire drill. When they want something, they needed it yesterday.
Gotcha.
And so you want that in front of them, because your competition's going to put that stuff in front of them.
I like that strategy. I like that.
So anyway, that'll give you an example. You're always thinking spreads or covers, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're trying to make a living here.
Yeah.
And and the unique thing about this, Joe, is God has so blessed me. The people He has put in my life that are just unbelievable. Give you an example. I used to do 50, 60 speaking engagements in churches in the course of a year at sportsmen's events. And I'd be able to share my photography, and I'd also be able to share my testimony with those in attendance. And I'm speaking in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. This is now back in the early 1980s. First time I'd been in that area. A man shows up to hear me speak because he's really into whitetails. His name is Ben Lingle. And so I meet the guy. I do the program. Afterwards, a guy comes up to me, hands me Ben Lingle's card. He said, Mr. Lingle would like you to call him. Well, I didn't know what the guy looked like. I mean, there was a lot of people there. But he didn't come up and introduce himself. So I called him on the phone. This guy owns 3,000 acres of land. He's a big coal operator. He's a Christian. All right? And he's got whitetails all over his estate. And he allowed me to come there and photograph. I photographed there for 10 years. I had keys to the gates and everything else.
And he didn't allow hunting on the property?
Well, he had some hunting going on, but he had a 300-acre enclosure for whitetails because he liked to watch whitetails. And so I photographed in that enclosure for 10 years. Now those deer were wild. I had to photograph them out of a blind, but what an opportunity that was. It was like I was part of the family.
Yeah.
His lodge looked like a motel, and he had a little 9-hole golf course there. And so extreme wealth, God put that guy in my life. Same thing happened in the Adirondacks. I got a chance to photograph on the Avery estate. They had 3,000 acres of land. They allowed no hunting, and they fed their deer year round because you could do it legally at that time. And I photographed there for 10 years. And so, it was unbelievable. I mean, God placed these things in my way and right in front of me, and I took advantage of them. He opened all the doors. And that's the way it's been. That's the way my whole career's been. And so
I was hoping you would
God
mention
has made
something
me
like
able to do what I do. It's that simple. And it's he's blessed me beyond measure. And so I speak a lot of places, met some incredible people along the way, and he's given me the greatest job on earth. I mean, it's a great way to make a living, but boy, what a way to make a life. That's what's been special.
I like how you put that, making a living versus making a life.
Yeah, there's two different things there.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people make a living, but they never make a life. Because they're chasing the dollar all the time, and they sacrifice their family for what they do. And that's a killer.
Well, Charlie, this has been really great, and I think that this is probably a really good point to wrap things up. But I just had one more thing I wanted to ask you, and it's for the hunters who are listening.
Yeah.
Because this is going out. Opening day is going to be on Saturday. So just real quick, if you can sum up like just a couple tips, what do guys need to do this year to get the bucks?
To get the bucks.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you got to hunt where the bucks are, and not every property is a primal property. And I often tell people, he who has the food has the deer. That is critical.
He who has the food has the deer.
He who has the food has the deer. Whitetails need to eat 4 times a day. You need to know what they're eating, because that's where they're going to be. Not every place in Steuben County where we're at has got great acorn crop. Some places do, some places don't. Not every place has a great apple crop. Some places have standing corn, some don't. The key is, where is the food? And if you've got food, you're going to have the deer. That's the biggie, okay? And so there's so many dynamics to this. What kind of hunting pressure do you have? What's the weather going to be? Have you pre-scouted the area? So there's, again, a lot of dynamics. But I tell people,
when there was one thing to remember,
he who has the food has the deer.
He who has the food has the deer. So,
because that's where you're going to find that deer population.
Got it.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm not going to tell anyone where I hunt because I'd like to keep it to myself. So
must be you've got the food.
We got some food there. But
yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Okay.
I really enjoyed this,
right.
And hopefully you guys got something out of this too. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them in the comments section below. And thank you again, Charlie.
Okay.
We'll see you next time.
All right.